Welcome to I Got Stuck, a catalog of temporary obsessions, with me, your host, Dr. Kelly Reedy, where in each episode I'll give you a full report on the latest topic that's kept me up at night. And this is an exciting episode because it's the first one since last December. I've got a lot of new episodes in my to-make pile right now, and I've got two quick updates before I get into today's topic. This will only take a few seconds, I promise. First of all, I've started an Instagram account that you can find at I Got Stuck Pod. Next, and last of all, I just, tonight in fact, started a Patreon that you can join to get bonus mini episodes and monthly updates and help me choose future topics. Please join it because I need some buddies and curiosity. I'll put a link in the show notes and on all my social media, but you can go to patreon.com/IGotStuck if you want. There's already a bonus mini episode up just for Patreon members, and it's all about pigeons. So thank you in advance if you take a second to check that out. And thank you for listening to my very exciting to me announcement. But now, moving on, I've got a lot of creepy topics in the queue for later this year, but I wanted to make sure to get at least one creepy one out before Halloween. So today, I'm going to talk about a ghost ship. But I want to be clear on what I mean by ghost ship, because there are several ways one could interpret ghost ship. To me, the most obvious thing it sounds like it means is a ship that's haunted by ghosts. And I did an episode on one of those last year, the RMS Queen Mary. The queen of all the ghost ships that are called ghost ships because they're haunted by ghosts. It's a really specific title she has. And speaking of episodes, expect more boat-related episodes later this year, because I'm now a card-carrying member of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, and I'm really fired up about that. But I don't want to get off track here. That's coming later this year. Back to ghost ships. Another definition of ghost ship, other than a ship that's haunted by ghosts, is a ship that's supposed to have living people on it, but doesn't. This is usually reserved for cases where the people who are supposed to be on the ship either are mysteriously missing or they're all dead and the ship has just been floating around for a while full of dead bodies. This is the type that people are usually talking about when they talk about ghost ships. And there are a lot of examples of this type of ghost ship because sadly, in the history of ships, a lot of crews have ill-advisedly abandoned perfectly good ships for unknown reasons, and then they, the crew, are never seen again. The Mary Celeste is probably the most famous example of this type of ghost ship. So, back to the 1800s we go. The Mary Celeste was built in Nova Scotia around 1860. But she wasn't called the Mary Celeste at first. She was given the name Amazon. Quick sidebar on boats' pronouns. Boats are often referred to with she, her pronouns. There's not just one specific reason for that, but there are a lot of theories, including the fact that historically ships were most often named after goddesses or specific real-life women, which makes sense. And an even more logical reason might be the fact that the Latin word for ship, navis, is, grammatically speaking, a feminine noun. I also read that boats were, quote, regarded as the offspring of Mother Nature herself and therefore referred to as she. Also from the website where I read that, which by the way is clippermarine.co.uk, get ready for this quotation. When you hear someone calling a boat she, it signifies a rich maritime tradition connecting sailors to the vastness of the sea and the captivating essence of femininity. There you have it. And so you know, I tend to go back and forth between she and it when referring to most boats, because they both feel weird and wrong to me. I don't know. But back to this boat, the Mary Celeste, née Amazon. It, or she, if you will, was a brigantine, which very loosely defined is a two-masted sailing ship with some specific types of rigging that I'm not going to tell you about because I don't understand. I just learned from Encyclopedia Britannica that brigantines with square topsails above the gaff mainsail were called true brigantines, whereas those with no square sails at all on the mainmast were called hermaphrodite brigs, or brig schooners. So basically, just picture a big boat with two masts, and you've got the Amazon, the future Mary Celeste. It was launched for the first time in 1861. After a few shenanigans that damaged the boat, the death of the captain, and then a full-on running aground in 1867, the Amazon got transferred to American owners in 1868, and it was then renamed the Mary Celeste because there was a superstition that renaming a ship would change its luck. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. After the boat got renamed, more shenanigans happened that you can read about on your own. I'm going to skip over all that and get to the exciting part. On November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste left New York and headed for Genoa, Italy, carrying 1,701 barrels of alcohol. Also on board, Captain Briggs' wife, their 2-year-old daughter, named Sophie or Sophia. For some reason, I don't have her name in my notes, but she was 2. And a crew of 7 people. About a month after the Mary Celeste set sail from New York, a British ship called the Dei Gratia spotted a ship with slightly torn sails, just drifting around weirdly, erratically in choppy water. This was about 400 miles east of the Azores Islands. And to help with your mental map, I'll tell you, that's around 900 miles west of Portugal. So the Dei Gratia spotted a ship and recognized it as the Mary Celeste. Amazingly, the captain of the Dei Gratia knew Captain Briggs of the Mary Celeste, and he knew that the Mary Celeste had left New York 8 days before the Dei Gratia itself had left New York, and the Mary Celeste was a faster ship than the Dei Gratia. So the Dei Gratia's captain knew that something was wrong. He changed course, and he headed straight for the Mary Celeste. When they got there, the captain of the Dei Gratia sent some of his crew over to board the Mary Celeste to investigate, and they found nobody on board. The ship itself seemed mostly fine. One of the pumps had been taken apart, and there was a little bit of flooding, but nothing drastic. All the cargo seemed to be there, everybody's stuff looked undisturbed, and there was enough food and water to last probably 6 months. There were no signs of struggle, and almost nothing seemed out of place, except that the ship's one and only lifeboat was missing, as well as the ship's navigational instruments and its papers. One interesting detail is that it looked like the lifeboat had been tied to the ship and then later cut or pulled loose. They did find the ship's logbook, and its last entry was from 10 days earlier. It gave the location from that day as over 400 miles away from the location where the other crew found the Mary Celeste. And at that time, when that last logbook entry was written, the Mary Celeste would have been close enough to the island of Santa Maria to actually see land. So what happened? Nobody knows. End of episode. Just kidding. Of course, there are some theories that I want to tell you about. Theory 1. Piracy? Nope, because everybody's stuff was still there, including their valuables. Theory 2. Aliens? Maybe, but only if they also took the lifeboat. What would aliens do with a lifeboat? Theory 3. Mutiny? Probably not, because the Mary Celeste captain, Captain Briggs, was well respected, had a good reputation for being competent, and personally chose his crew very carefully for this trip. Also, if it was a mutiny, why would the crew then also abandon the ship? Theory 4. Salvage money. Now, this one is worth talking about for a minute. When the Dei Gratia found the Mary Celeste adrift, part of the crew took over and sailed her to Gibraltar. Normally, in this case, the finders of an abandoned ship like that would get a salvage payment from the insurers of the ship. But the insurance people who investigated the situation thought it seemed kind of fishy. To them, it definitely looked like the crew of the Dei Gratia had murdered everybody on board the Mary Celeste, dumped their bodies, and brought in the boat for that salvage money, which I gotta say seems like a pretty reasonable assumption on their part. The investigation went on for over 3 months, and finally they concluded that there was no evidence of any sort of foul play. But they still refused to pay out the full amount of salvage money. The Dei Gratia crew was only paid 1/6 of what they should have been paid, and when that was divided amongst them, it was pretty much chump change. I read somewhere it was like enough to buy a new jacket or something like that. But to counter the salvage money theory, I'll remind you that the captains of the two boats were friends, and there are some reports that said they had dinner the night before the Mary Celeste left New York, but I've also read that that's probably not true. But they were friends. And also, the Dei Gratia would have had to catch up with the Mary Celeste to do all that murdering and scheming. Remember, the Mary Celeste was both a faster boat, and it had left New York 8 days before the Dei Gratia. So I don't know about you, but I'm not really buying the salvage money theory. Here's where I want to point out that after this salvage money related hearing, people moved on. Nobody really cared about the Mary Celeste until in 1884, Arthur Conan Doyle published a short fictionalized story written from the perspective of somebody who had been on board the Mary Celeste. He did call the ship in his story the Marie Celeste, Marie, but the story was almost definitely inspired by the Mary Celeste, and some people think the change from Mary to Marie was actually just a misspelling. Arthur Conan Doyle published this anonymously, and some people thought it was real. Most notably, and funniest to me, the Boston Herald published it as a true story. Anyway, after this story got around, everybody was going crazy, speculating about what happened to the people who had been aboard the Mary Celeste, and it became news again because of this fictional story. I'm not going to talk about the plot of the story because it was super racist. I want to get back to theories about what actually happened. Theory 5. Sea monsters, of course. There have seriously been theories that a big octopus or something snatched everybody from off the ship. But what about those missing navigation instruments, though? Does a sea monster need a compass? Does a hydra need an astrolabe? Theory 6. Spiritualism was big at the time, and some spiritualists thought that witchcraft or mass hallucination could have led everybody to abandon the Mary Celeste. And there's another fictional work related to the Mary Celeste that's really actually about spiritualists and spiritualism, but the background event is the disappearance of the people on board the Mary Celeste. It actually sounds kind of cool to me, but it doesn't have great reviews. 3.1 on Goodreads. But if you're interested, it's called The Ghost of the Mary Celeste by Valerie Martin from 2014. Let me know what you think. And finally, Theory 7. Perhaps the most obvious theory. The theory that something happened and made those 10 people on board think that the ship was going to sink. They either were so freaked out that they left in a big hurry without packing anything, hence the personal belongings and food all left behind, or they just thought they'd be in the lifeboat temporarily, which also makes sense with the observation that the lifeboat had been tied to the boat initially. One sub-theory here is the waterspout theory. I had to look up what a waterspout is, but turns out it's pretty much what I would have guessed and what I thought it was anyway. It's a rotating column of air and mist over water. There are two types of waterspouts, tornadic waterspouts and fair weather waterspouts. Tornadic waterspouts are tornadoes that form over water or tornadoes that start on land and move to the water. Fair weather waterspouts are weirder, I think, but they are actually more common. These are waterspouts that form from the surface of the water and move up. And they're also generally less dangerous than tornadic waterspouts. But can you imagine seeing that process happen? It's one thing to picture a tornado moving across the water. You kind of see it coming, but just to watch one form in front of you, wow. One version of the waterspout theory is that a waterspout happened near the Mary Celeste and made everybody on board think that the ship was going down and they needed to escape. The waterspout theory would also explain why the sails and the rigging were tattered and damaged. I think the waterspout theory sounds pretty legit personally, but I have another sub-theory in this category to tell you about. Remember, we're talking about the category that something happened that made them think the ship was going to sink. Side note, some people speculated that Captain Briggs died before everybody abandoned ship, and so they were left with no experienced voice of reason on board, and therefore acted rashly as a reaction to something. We don't know what. What could have happened to make them think that they needed to abandon the Mary Celeste? Wait, what about that alcohol? Remember that there was a lot of alcohol on board. around 1,700 barrels. When the alcohol cargo was examined more closely after the Mary Celeste was found, 9 of the barrels were mysteriously empty. And in case you're thinking, that's not so mysterious actually, note that it was denatured alcohol, which is not drinkable and is more like fuel. Those 9 empty barrels have led some people to speculate about an alcohol leak. In this theory, the alcohol leaked out of some of the barrels, and either there was a small explosion, not enough to really damage the ship, or the crew thought that there would be. And maybe they just planned to be in the lifeboat until the alcohol fumes dissipated enough to not have to worry about an explosion, but then somehow the rope connecting the lifeboat to the boat broke, and they were doomed. One piece of evidence that supports that theory, kind of loosely at least, is that those 9 barrels that were empty were made of red oak, whereas all the others were made of white oak. Red oak is more porous and thus more likely to leak. But what about that pump that had been taken apart that I mentioned earlier? The pump might have been clogged with coal from its previous trip, and they might have been trying to fix it. The pump was a bilge pump that would have automatically pumped water out of the hull of the boat if it got up to a certain level. One good pump-related theory is that Captain Briggs couldn't easily eyeball the water level in the ship's hull because of all those alcohol barrels crowding up the room. And with the one clogged pump, he was worried that the ship would flood. So when he saw land, he thought, oh, we'll just get in this lifeboat since we're so close, better safe than sorry. But the ship was never actually in danger of sinking, and for whatever reason, they never made it to land. That seems to be the most likely theory, but it's still just speculation. And of course, we'll probably never know what actually happened on board the Mary Celeste. The New England Historical Society sums it up nicely in a headline on their website. The Mary Celeste, a mystery solved by everyone, just never correctly. Oh, but also, some people say there was a captain's curse on the Mary Celeste. In addition to whatever happened to Captain Briggs, 2 other captains of the boat died prematurely, and another captain had it taken away by creditors before Captain Briggs even ended up with it. The Mary Celeste was released after the investigations and taken back to New York. New owners started using it as a cargo ship, but they mostly just lost money. In 1879, another captain got sick while on board, landed the boat somewhere, and promptly died. Finally, in 1884, the last captain crashed the Mary Celeste intentionally for insurance money. The people who evaluated the situation said there was nothing valuable on board, and also, deliberately crashing a ship was punishable by death. They let that captain off easy with no death penalty, but he died 3 months later, totally impoverished. And another man who was involved with the scheme died by suicide, and another, quote, went mad. Ooh. A writer named Danny Chase has speculated that perhaps the ship itself was the killer, or it might have been cursed by someone with a hatred for authority or malice toward the first captain to die, but the curse unfortunately kept going past him. And that guy says that the captain who ran the ship aground got some revenge by doing so, which I think is totally obnoxious because I'm sure the Mary Celeste had her reasons if she is, in fact, to blame. So maybe the Mary Celeste was cursed, maybe she was an actual killer boat, and maybe she was also a phantom ship. Which brings me to another interpretation of ghost ship, a ship that is itself a ghost, aka a phantom ship. So you already know that the Mary Celeste was a functional ship after whatever happened out there with Captain Briggs until she was wrecked that last time. During that time period, people saw the Mary Celeste, which is totally normal since it was still a working ship. But people claim to have seen ghostly versions. For example, in 1879, one captain was traveling through the Strait of Gibraltar and, quote, reported seeing the ship's sails illuminated in an unnatural way, even though the sun had long since set. As his ship drew nearer, he and his crew watched in horror as the Mary Celeste appeared to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only a faint outline in the mist. Also, for the rest of the Mary Celeste's time as a working ship, the people on board reported weird, ghostly stuff happening, including actually seeing ghosts on board. So this means that the Mary Celeste, is not only the type of ghost ship that's found with no people on it when it's supposed to have people on it, but it's also a ship that is a ghost, and it's also a ship that's haunted by ghosts, according to reports. One more tiny ghost story related to the Mary Celeste is that a guy sailing in the Azores in 1884 came across a lifeboat with passengers on it who looked like they were trying to get him to help them, but as he got closer, the lifeboat vanished. A mini ghost ship! Ooh! Oh wait, one more interesting thing. There's an article from a 1902 issue of the Brooklyn Eagle about the aftermath of the Mary Celeste incident. And it includes an account by the wife of one of the crew members that was on board the Mary Celeste. I'm going to close this one out by reading you an excerpt from this account right now. Here we go. On the night of November 24th, between 12 and 1 o'clock, I awakened from a dreadful dream. My screams filled the house, and I knew then that my husband was lost. He had always told me that he would send me warning if anything should happen to him. I did not believe in spiritualism and only laughed at him. I dreamed that I was going on board a wrecked, dilapidated-looking ship that had no masts and that I had to walk aboard on a square joist of timber. In the distance, I could see a large ship with white sails bearing down upon us. When I reached the deck, a hideous-looking man came up to me, I thought, and put something like a snake around my waist and said, "That is part of your husband, and it is all you will ever see of him." I awoke screaming, as I told you, and nearly went distracted. The last entry on the log was on that very date, November 24th, and I'm quite sure that whatever catastrophe happened occurred at that very hour when I dreamed I saw that man. And this is where I'll leave you. Until next time, stay curious, but stay away from waterspouts and sea monsters and pirates and aliens, just in case. And don't forget to go check out my new Patreon at patreon.com/IGotStuck. This theme song was written and recorded by Clark Blomquist. Hey, did you hear about the understaffed ghost ship? Apparently, they were only working with a skeleton crew.